Welcome back to Proud to Lead. I'm Shawn Quintero, and in this interview with Randy Kim, we explore ICE, whether or not we should abolish ICE. We have a conversation around immigration and what reform would look like, and we talk about how to handle being approached by someone who is an ICE agent, whether you are undocumented or a citizen. We have a conversation around what we hope we see from more Democratic politicians who feel like they're really giving us just a performative position rather than feeling genuine anger about what's happening with ICE detention, deportations, and the tragic stories that are happening to undocumented immigrants. We also talk about what the queer immigrant story is and how there are queer immigrants today who are getting deported to countries and places that are very hostile to LGBTQ plus people. And we talk about what we can do to create change today in our cities and our states. I'd love to know your opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Do you think we need to reform ICE or do you think we need to abolish it completely? I read every single one of your comments and respond to as many as I can get to. Remember to like and subscribe. I'm Shawn Quintero. This is Proud to Lead. So I was introduced to you on Threads because you were doing these emergency broadcasts is what it felt like these emergency podcast episodes where you were getting out a ton of information, specifically in regards to how to interact with ICE, what to do with ICE, what's happening around ICE and some of the immigration raids. A lot of the conversations around immigration that I feel are happen at a distance, right? We talk about policy debates, headlines, political talking points, but your work was really interesting because it was really grounded in what's actually happening, especially in places around Chicago during moments of real enforcement, real fear, real uncertainty. So for you, when you look at what's happening right now with immigration enforcement, especially ICE activity, what feels most urgent for people to actually understand what's happening?
It's April 23rd today, and there's been a lot of activities happening. ICE is still very present in the city, and ICE agents are going into the courts where people are getting served for, typical immigration hearing. ICE have been present and detaining people from there. What I think is very important right now is just intercepting the harmful narratives that a lot of mainstream media have failed to cover. Not only immigrants, but also for U.S. citizens. We saw what happened in Minneapolis with the shooting of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. So I'd say that that's the first thing that comes to mind. Like, how do we prepare people to protect themselves, learn about the role that law enforcement plays into this? Because I think there's been a lot of confusion. I've had some episodes where I've talked to congressional candidate and current alderman Byron Sigel Lopez and other folks about what are police doing. And certain police officers or police departments have been aiding and abetting ICE agents. And so that's been causing a lot of confusion within the communities of who's actually protecting us. And what we're seeing now is community leaders are rallying together to create safety networks. And that has been very vital to make sure that anywhere from like protecting food vendors outside or protecting children, walking them to and from school or doing pickups or maybe escorting elders to the grocery store or to their doctor's appointments. So those were starting to come out. And I think that these are stories that are very important to bring up here. And one of the things that I've always told people is that it's very important to tell stories from a place of an asset-based narrative rather than from a place of deficit. Because for a lot of marginalized communities, it feels like we're always talking about trauma, the horrible things that are happening. And while that is very true, and we are in a very dystopian, very dire time right now, I also want to lift up the people who are doing the work to keep our communities safe. And I think that's important to give hope to the communities, but also to hopefully bring that information to other communities. I think when I was doing these episodes in October through November, I also made it a point that I've got to be able to let other communities outside Chicago aware of what's going on, to Minneapolis, to Tacoma, to what's going on in California and other places around the US, so that communities have enough information on what to do when they are confronted with ICE. And I think that is important and vital right now to find ways to share information, whether it's doing social media posts, but even if you feel like, you know, Meta or TikTok or suppressing it, DMs using Signal. I mean, there are a multitude of ways where we could try to have that conversation. And
Why don't you walk us through that context of being able to understand, like, where did this come from, and why we're experiencing such a vitriol reaction? Obviously, we had, a campaign 2 years ago, a year and a half
Mhm,
ago, where immigration was the number one topic, right next to affordability. And obviously, there was a candidate who ended up winning who addressed immigrants in a very vitriolic way.
mhm.
So I obviously can see from that perspective, but give me a deeper understanding of, like, where did this come from? Why is ICE so aggressively attacking immigrants in such a harsh, traumatic way?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to the founding of ICE back during the George W. Bush years. This is like right after 9/11. It was created to create stricter immigration enforcements. And what I could say is that that's how it got started. And as a result, there were folks that were undocumented. They were getting deported. In the Cambodian and the Southeast Asian communities, more specifically, there were folks that came into the U.S. when they were kids, and they were born in refugee camps, and most of them were, and they were caught with like minor infractions to a felony, and they had served their time. I mean, they sought the legal status, I believe, through a green card or a visa, but that eliminates them from like being able to get the citizenship. And what happens is that years later, after they have served their time, they have started their own business, they have raised families, turned their lives around, and they are getting detained and getting sent away to a homeland that they were never really familiar with. So that was also happening. And through time, this was continuing with the Bush administration. This was also continuing during the Obama administration. I mean, when I was working in immigrant rights organizing for a brief time in 2012, 2013 ish, he was known as the deporter in chief because even though he did the executive order to bring DACA, it was only like a band-aid solution. But what happened was that ICE enforcements were getting very tough. Like they were still getting people detained, getting the court orders, the warrants to bring people to court, and the judge will have to decide whether that person stays or goes. And this was continuing, of course, with the Trump 1.0 administration, and then under the Biden administration, and then now the past year or so, this has taken on a whole nother level. But a lot of the protocols that were in place that ICE was doing was thrown away. I mean, it was a completely new rule book that ICE agents were just simply going rogue. People in Chicago had to bring their passports. In some people that did, they were still getting detained. And it's it's hard to believe what former DHS person Christy Nome was doing, and then Greg Bovino, who then also resigned recently. And things have, in a way, quieted down, but there's still a lot of enforcement's happening around the city. It's just a little bit more quieter.
I think that's one of my biggest concerns is this idea that it's
Hmm.
not as hot as it was, so then we don't have to pay attention to it. What are people
Hmm.
missing now that's still happening, but it's just not a headline in any major news media?
I think right now people are under the assumption that ICE is gone and that ICE is not like, patrolling the streets. I think that they're doing it a little bit more discreetly. And I do see that communication from communities still has to be just as robust as it was during that particular time. It's still happening and people are still at risk. And we saw like maybe a few weeks ago during the TSA shutdown, ICE was like lurking around the US airports, and that created a very difficult situation. So I would say that I do think that people, even though that there is a level of letting your guard down, I think enough people do know that ICE is not going away. because Trump is
Yeah.
still in office. And the Republicans have both the US Senate, the House, and also the Supreme Court. So I think that there is this concern that, yeah, I mean, things are going to be chaotic day by day. I mean, who knows what's going to happen by the time summer hits?
Yeah. I'm curious to explore. You mentioned like this isn't new. It's just expanded and kind of
Hmm.
amplified. But ICE has been here since the early 2000s. It's
Hmm.
existed under Obama. Obama was deporter in chief. I hear a lot of times this kind of social media back and forth, which is, well, Obama did it.
Hmm.
He did the exact same thing Trump did. And then I kind of hear the rhetoric of like, yeah, so you can deport without there being such vitriol and such hatred. There was still mass deportations. Is ICE is the existence of ICE as an agency necessary in order for us to have safe borders? And what does that look like? Like, is the solution to advocate for politicians to abolish ICE? Is it to reduce its funding? Is it to pour funding into different alternatives? Like, what is the solution to the immigration problem?
I think my personal answer would be to abolish ICE. I think that it's easier said than done, but I do think that when you are spending billions of dollars on creating unnecessary security that is targeting immigrants, especially people who are not don't have a criminal background. You're targeting families. I'm like, is it even necessary to like create this system that is basically detaining people? And also, like with ICE, you're also talking about the for-profit prisons and also the companies that are very much part of it, like whether it's, the telephone company to the transportation services, the food, like Aramark being one of them. Like, there's a lot that goes into it that really does need to be examined and have to be called out. I think that when you are spending money to try and build Alligator Alcatraz, and then when you have like missing immigrants or having immigrants being sent to countries that they're not even from, it's very, very disturbing. There are people that will feel like, okay, maybe we have to do reform. Well, Audre Lorde said it best, like you can't really fix the house with the master's tools, basically. I think right now it's like it's gotten so violent and it's hard to, make it a good organization, even though it never was to begin with.
I think it's also a matter of like redefining what the problem is. Is the problem an immigration problem? Is it the problem a law enforcement problem? I can see this from like multiple angles of like
Hmm.
when I hear not politicians, but
Hmm.
everyday voters who voted Republican, who voted because of the immigration issue, they're voting for the reduction of drug trafficking, maybe human trafficking. It's a job question
Hmm.
of I don't want my job being taken away, despite the fact that there's overwhelming amounts of evidence that immigrants don't take jobs, that they are filling
They
a
actually
job that
add,
was not taken either way, right? Like
they create jobs. That's what
they
they do.
create jobs. They produce for the economy. They increase our GDP. There's so many positive benefits, but when I see the negative, how do we solve that if ICE is not the solution? How do we solve the drug trafficking, human trafficking, and even sense of safety that I think people really were voting for? Is like I just want to feel safe in my home.
Yeah, I think it's such a loaded question, but I will say that the last comprehensive immigration reform was 1986, 40 years ago. So things have
Wow.
been so obsolete. Things have changed drastically in those 40 years since then. So how to become the pathway to US citizenship is very complicated. And people think, well, well, my cousin did this and, she got her citizenship. Why can't this person do it? Well, there's a lot of very different factors we're looking at here. And unfortunately, with the US immigration system, it's been very broken because there's no uniform or universal way to get a pathway to citizenship because some of it can be from a lottery, some of it can be through, marriage, some of it could be through work sponsorship and whether a company is willing to spend thousands of dollars to have you around. It's not a very easy solution. And the other immigration reform was in 1996 under Bill Clinton, and that actually kind of like made immigration stricter. But it didn't create the solution for what to do with the people already in the country and what does their pathway to citizenship look like. So, for example, when you have people who've been on DACA, like These are people that did not come out on their own volition. They were coming in as newborns to like like adolescent as adolescent kids. And so it's like, how is that fair for them too? And so I think the narrative around immigration has been very harmful. Like when you mentioned they're taking our jobs, they're causing crimes. I do think that people who are undocumented are unlikely to commit crimes. I mean, there's statistics to show it because a lot of them are afraid to report to the police if there's a crime because of the fear of being deported. I mean, it's not just the Latinx community that's also dealing with it. You know, African, like Haitian communities. You also got Asian communities that also are under that threat too. And this is not just, specifically tied to the Latino population. And I think this is a really tough question. I do think that there needs to be a lot of community involvement with this, community input. What does the legalization of drugs mean? Or what does it mean to stop
Mm.
criminalizing drug offenses? And what does it create when you do that, and could we see substance abuse as a health issue, as an opportunity to treat it rather than to punish? So what does that look like? But also, how is the US in a way enabling that by creating harmful invasions or government disruptions like what we saw in Venezuela? I mean, what we saw in Chile years ago. So,
Mm.
you know, when the US has been creating these conditions that forces refugees and migrants to move up to the US, that is something that really needs to be examined. What is the US's involvement?
I think you bring up a really good point in wanting to change the narrative, because the narrative is immigrants are bad, immigrants take jobs, immigrants hurt the economy, when almost the exact opposite of it is, the likelihood that somebody who is an illegal immigrant or who is here undocumented, will commit crime is extremely low compared to a white US citizen. The likelihood that they're going to take a job is, they are adding to the economy, as we talked about
Mhm,
already. And I also think about, like, with ice, an analogy I tend to come back to is ice is a hammer trying to fix a broken glass, right? Like, you
mhm,
can't use a hammer to fix a broken glass. There's so much
mm,
more
mhm,
reparative work that's required in order to fix that broken glass. And so, looking at the drug issue not as a crime issue but as a healthcare issue, looking at our involvement in international affairs and what we're doing to create conditions that causes those nations to have such impoverished conditions, looking at community involvement, and looking at pouring more into the community through welfare programs and social programs that support healthy living. Those things dramatically reduce crime. Okay, well, if ICE isn't the solution and the solution is more of these social programs, what do you wish more politicians understood when it came to standing up for the immigration or for the immigrant community? What do you wish you heard more from politicians? Is it abolish ICE language? Is it reformation language? Is it something else?
Yeah, I'd like to see more commitment to not only abolishing ICE, but also creating a healthier, safer system in place that does not dehumanize people, especially with marginalized communities. I think that a lot of marginalized communities have distrust not only with the Republicans, but also with the Democrats, because in a way they've been also complicit. So I think for a politician, I think they really need to start listening to their constituents, especially those who aren't able to vote. I think that really not not chasing after them during the election cycle, but going to be very present you know in front of the ICE detention centers, or being willing to use their privilege to stand up against this very authoritative power. So I think that they do matter in this, but also what you're voting on also matters. Like, what trickle effects does it have? Like, if you are giving more aid to Israel, like, how is this connected to what's going on with ICE, when ICE has been learning from Israel when it comes to defense work? So I think that I would like our politicians to be more transparent and to really understand what's at stake. Like, this is not a normal situation. This is not something that can be compromised. Like, I would really like our politicians to be very front and center and to work at dispelling the harmful narratives that a lot of the Republicans and megas have like really created.
When I think about politicians, it's so easy to have a buttoned up answer that's going to try to
Hmm.
kind of connection to as many people as possible. But I wish what I saw more of from politicians is anger. I don't think we're angry enough at what's happening
Hmm.
in ICE detention centers. I don't think
Hmm.
we're angry enough at the conditions that are creating illness and even death in these centers. I don't think we're angry enough at the fact that we have
Hmm.
deported people to places they are not aware of or from, or have no historical or cultural connection to. I wish I saw more politicians who are asking for positions of power to show the anger that we, the people they're representing, have.
Hmm.
I think there's been such traumatic experiences that we've encountered,
Hmm.
and I wish I saw more politicians speak with maybe a little bit less elegance and a little bit more
Hmm.
humanity and frustration,
Hmm.
because that would at least signal that you get it, that this is something that
Hmm.
actually means something to you, and you're not just trying to get a vote, but you actually want to create change
Hmm.
because of the anger that you're feeling around the injustice.
Yeah, you said it because we don't know where this Trump administration is going to go. Like, we have like what, I don't know how many more years like left. I mean, it feels like it's an eternity. I mean, he's been in office for over a year and it feels like it's been 10 years already and a lot has happened. And so, like, there could be more party laws or Keith Porters and Renee Goods and Alex Petty victims out there, like in the future. And that's what scares me. And also what we're seeing happening in the Middle East right now. It's incredibly alarming. So, yes, our politicians, like, the Chuck Schumers of the world or the people who've been in power for like, God, before I was born, that just seems so disconnected is why we are in the situation where we're at now. It's kind of like when you have like your allies still opening the doors for the oppressors to still come in, even though the other door was like locked, you're still letting them in. And I think
Mhm.
that's kind of how I see it right now. I think that there has to be a stronger commitment, a stronger unified message that says that, yes, we do not need this. We do need to divest away from ICE and put it into mental health care, universal health care, into creating more jobs and creating more ways to help communities thrive. And this should not feel like a radical position. But unfortunately, it's seen as radical. But I think right now I think that times
Yeah.
are very dire right now and people don't have the time to worry about what's going to happen on their next paycheck or if they're able to make it back home safely.
Yeah. I think about the phrase that has been, owned and dominated and so prevalent under Trump years, which is make America great again. And I
Hmm.
think about the ways that we would be able to actually do that. How would we make America better and
Hmm.
healthier and more fulfilling to live here and safer to live here? And I think all of the things I've seen Trump 2.0 and even 1.0, which feels like decades ago under both of these administrations, I cannot see anything that has truly improved
Hmm.
just everyday quality of life for the American person, for the person who
Hmm.
lives in America. And so when we look at some of these social programs, universal health care, universal child care, housing credit, first time buyers
Hmm.
housing credit, like these are the things that impact people's everyday lives. And I think the people who do that really well are like Pete Buttigieg, I think AOC, I think Bernie Sanders. When I look at them, they're
Hmm.
talking about the real tabletop problems that people are
Hmm.
speaking about. Why do you think politicians end up in that kind of position where it's more of a performative support rather than communicating in a way that resonates with people?
I think it comes to how much they are receiving from corporate donors. I mean, look, I think when the Supreme Court, allowed Citizens United to continue, that was like the death knell when it came to how politicians are being funded. It's not just the votes; it's like getting the corporate backings. And that really says something. I mean, APAC is like one of many other harmful PACs that have really created the environment that we're living in right now. So I think that really speaks to the integrity. Like when we look at politicians who have been receiving APAC money, these are things that we just can't look away from because because like funding a war in Israel is also what's leading us to the war in Iran, and also and also funding ICE, and like it is very connected. And also there's been a shutting down of like black and brown community leaders or politicians candidates that are like taking the more progressive turn or what's seen as radical, like let's say Cori Bush or Anina Turner, and how they got shut out completely. And so that doesn't do much to restore the confidence of many marginalized folks. And also the Democratic Party is such a wide umbrella. I mean, you go from like a lot of the more leftists, but then you got the centrists, you got the non-Trumpers, but kind of Republicans. So it's like it's a very vast ideology gap. And I think it's really hard to figure out what would be a very strong message because I think that sometimes we do go into this all or nothing mentality. And I think my friend Ed said it best, like you can't the perfect get in the way of the good too. So it's like, look, like it's not good, like Rome wasn't built overnight. I mean, like you have to like build the foundation to like get these small wins and then be able to get the momentum to get that build to get that next step in. So unfortunately it does take time. It does take a lot of convincing.
I think that's a good point because when I think about, just going back to the 2024 election, I think it was so much easier for a Republican to justify voting for Trump as an imperfect candidate than it was for a Democrat to justify voting for Kamala, who is
Mhm,
so much more qualified, but maybe there was one issue that just didn't make her perfect, and so they didn't vote for her. And so I do think there's a I think I heard, I don't remember where I heard it, but like if you found somebody you agree with 100%, then you probably should get checked by a therapist because nobody agrees with anybody
mhm,
100%.
mhm,
It's always going to be a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. But I'd much rather vote for somebody who could win, who's
mhm,
maybe a 7 out of
mhm,
10 on my personal scale, but is so much better than what the other side has presented.
mhm,
We
mhm,
have these, I think, unrealistic expectations of who our politicians should be. And absolutely, like if you have convictions, advocate for your convictions, fight for those convictions. But
mhm,
who is going to be so much more open to hearing your
mhm,
advocacy work? Is it going to be somebody on the left or is it going to be somebody on the right? And my position is I would much rather have someone who's open to hearing my position and maybe even changing their mind and somebody who is
mhm,
so staunchly
mhm.
against everything I stand for, values included, and will never hear my perspective.
It's more than just voting. It's being very present. It's showing up to your town hall meetings. It's, disrupting the day of your politician and their staffers. I mean, you have to be very vocal on that because by the time the election rolls around, you have to ask yourself, what work have you done to get to this point? What are we able to build off of? Because voting every year is not going to cut it. Even in primaries, like we have to like start challenging the people that are in office, even if we have, a love affair with them in some ways, like we still have to be able to challenge them and hold them to the fire.
You mentioned something really key, which is getting involved in your community. You're a
Mhm,
community leader in your space. You have served in a variety of roles. What do you wish the everyday person knew in regards to their power? Like we have so much power as a people,
mhm.
especially when we come together. What is something you wish people knew more about when it came to their ability to advocate and create change?
The first thing I always say is I wish that people realize that their stories do matter because as a storyteller, as someone who's been a podcaster for a number of years who've brought in different voices on, I sometimes hear people's like, God, I don't feel like I'm good enough to be on your show, or I'm not good enough to story. I don't think I have an important story to tell. Like, I think we have to stop, you know, telling ourselves that we don't belong and that our stories don't matter. Like the imposter syndrome, the scarcity mindset is what will hurt us in the end. So if we start to realize that how much our stories do matter, then just think of the possibilities of what can do for us as a collective, like when we can really rally around each other, when we start telling stories and start sharing ideas, maybe create a way to imagine a better world. So I think that's what it really starts down to. And I hope that people realize that, we can find ways to still talk to our neighbors and to talk to people that are different than us, and to support other local businesses and and try to be a person that is working on building trust with other folks. And that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, I think about the response that people had and are having of like, "Oh, I didn't vote for this. I voted for the bad immigrants to get deported. I didn't vote for
Hmm.
the taco guy or the restaurant owner or my barber or
Hmm.
like my cleaner. Like I didn't vote to have them deported." And it's reminds me of a statistic that I read, which was if you have a relationship with someone, your friendship, your cousin, family, sibling, parents who is queer, LGBTQ plus, you are
Hmm.
more likely, I think it's by like double 50% increase likelihood of voting for things like marriage equality rights,
Hmm.
LGBTQ plus rights, trans rights, because you have a relationship with that person.
Hmm.
In
Hmm.
hearing you sharing your stories and being open about your culture and your journey, it's so important to know that that does impact people's voting. You
Hmm.
impact how people support things and advocate for things. Have you seen that to be true for you as well?
Yeah, actually, both of my younger brothers, I think for a while they've always had very centrist to very moderate positions, and one of them just passed away recently. So so both of my
I'm sorry to hear.
brothers, yeah, so both of my brothers, you know, start once they started to understand about my own queer identity and start to really not only accept it but to really embrace it. I think that there was that shift that was happening in their own politics and their sensitivity towards it too. Things like that, it does matter when like, does it happen for everyone? Unfortunately not. But it happens enough that, yeah, like, I think about, you know, like, I don't think I've met a trans person until, like, maybe 12, 13 years ago when I was with an LGBTQIA group in Chicago, and it really changed the way I view my politics moving forward, because prior to that, I felt like it was more of a very centrist. I was very, like, much a suburbanite and didn't really didn't really get too deep into my own queer identity, or at least in the queer spaces during that time until I moved to the city. And so, seeing the different stories from like people who would later become my good friends, it tells me how much they matter to me and how much I want to see them thrive, but also to be around. These are also my support system. And I think that there's something we said that when you're voting for immigration, for pro immigration, you're also trying to support, maybe your uncle or your aunt that's not a citizen yet, but also like the idea of them being taken away is quite horrifying. And so I hope that people get to find ways to connect their humanity into it. I just hope that start to speak our truths and hopefully see that, by leaning into the community, that there's a way that we can help to make everyone prosper.
Yeah, it's so easy to get frustrated by, having to come out over and over and over again as a queer person. I
Hmm.
know I've
Hmm.
experienced that frustration of like, okay, I have to scan the room for safety. I have to see, do I have to come
Hmm.
out to these people again? And yet I'm reminded of the impact of that, of like, hey,
Hmm.
I am the same person that you've been interacting with, and I'm also queer. And like, it really does shift people's perspectives of being able to see you in your humanity and not just as a stereotype or this label that they see in the media. And so share your story, get visible, get involved in your community, show up to those city council hall, sessions, show up to your
Hmm.
network, community networks, community leadership groups, go there, show up, share your story, connect with real people, because that really does make a difference. I have a question for you. So
Hmm.
going a little bit back to the immigrant experience with ICE, let's say you are somebody who gets stopped by ICE. what do
Mhm.
you do? Like, what is the best protocol to take in that moment?
I think it's very important to make sure that you have copies of your paperwork with you. I think that if you are a person of color and also like also that may be more vulnerable, I think it's important to make sure that you have like backup contacts or at least have someone with you. I think it's always good to be in groups rather than to be by yourself. I think if you're confronted by ICE, like making sure that do you have a warrant? When am I being stopped for? I don't have the full information, but I know it's on like one of my episode show notes that I did with I believe it was with Kalab and Doza, the your protest safety kuya, and then there's one with Jung that I did for the emergency episode several months back, which I think is very very useful. So I think that I would just look at the current updates on the immigration landscape at the moment. You know, check your local sources because you know, ICE agents they've shown that they can go rogue and not every experience with ICE agent is going to follow the rules that they should be following. Yes, I do believe that just making sure that you have backup and that people know where you're at.
Hmm.
And yeah, and making sure that if you have a lawyer in hand, make sure that number's handy. So yeah, I can share more on that too. But yeah, but those are the first thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and we'll put the in the show notes the link to
Mhm,
those episodes so that people can get
mhm,
that information. But
mhm,
what I'm hearing is make sure you have any paperwork that you need to
mhm,
prove citizenship or to prove your legal status. Make sure you
mhm,
have an attorney on standby. You've memorized their phone
mhm,
number. You have access to their
mhm,
phone number. You have communicated where you're at, and people can know your
mhm.
location, know what's happening. Is there anything else that people should know when it comes to that interaction with an ICE agent?
I think I think it's very important, like if you're witnessing, is to cause like to make sure that the neighborhood, like that you're in contact with the neighbors, you know, you're contact with the businesses, and that I always say that it takes more than one person sometimes, like to cause a scene. And I think that is very important to make sure that that gets documented. Say I'd say just, you know, using your due diligence, using just making sure that have read the latest updates, check in with the community networks that you're part of, and check in with your local office that's been providing ICE updates, making sure that you know for Illinois we have ICER, call the ICER number if you see an ICE agent around. So I think the reason why I'm more careful about it is because the rules keep changing and it's kind of hard to know what feels safe at the moment. So
Mm,
I say
yeah.
this with being very, very cautious and also how maybe this information may not be as current up to par in the next couple of months later. So I think that's also something to be aware of, but just really keep up to date and just kind of follow like certain people who are providing a lot of coverage on the ice rays and the safety networks.
The light that I'm seeing in the communities is that communities are moving from passive fear to more of an
Mhm,
active coordination and defense of
mhm,
people. And it feels like there's a cultural shift where even on the right, there's a lot of pushback and has been a lot of pushback against the
mhm,
activities that we've seen. Christy Nome being, resigning or being let go. And then you know, just the cool down in what seems like this activity. Obviously it's not as hot. It's still hot, but it's not as hot as it used to
mhm,
be. And so my hope is that after the midterms, if the left wins, that we do see some radical, immigration reform taking place. We do see an opportunity for people to become citizens, an easier path to citizenship than there has been so far, a
mhm,
clearer path of what
mhm,
it takes to get that and a solution for the people who are here, who are producing and being a good people of the land and good
mhm,
people of society. If you were advising a politician right now, you were in front of a politician right now, you've seen what has been working, what hasn't been working, you've been on the ground, you've spoken with a lot of people. What advice would you give to a candidate or a
mhm.
politician who's seeking office, who is concerned about this? What advice would you give them?
Center. the people who are the most marginalized and also the most affected. Listen to those stories and also listen to those that are seeing it from a very different narrative. And how do you challenge that narrative? So I think that's the first thing. And also, how do you restore trust? Because the trust has been broken for quite some time. So, what does it mean to really be in community? What does it mean to really listen and to be able to vote the way you talk? And so I think that is very clear, and just being very transparent with the community. Show what you're doing. Show us what you're taking the steps for. Make sure that they're not beholden to their corporate donors, and to really think about the people that are most affected and thinking about what it means to reimagine a better, thriving world.
Yeah. There's two people that I think of. One in changing narratives, which is Katie Porter,
Hmm.
who is running for governor in California. They just had their gubernatorial debates and they were having a conversation around homelessness. And Katie Porter said, you know, the narrative around homelessness is they're either on drugs or they have mental challenges. But there
Hmm.
are so many more people who are
Hmm.
homeless who don't fit those two categories. There are single moms who have fled domestic abuse
Hmm.
and difficult homes. There are college students living out of their car. There
Hmm.
are people who are trying to build businesses who are living, they don't have any money to be able to buy a home, and so like it's a housing crisis issue. There
Hmm.
are people who couldn't afford, you know, lost their jobs and just had 3 or 4 months of savings and now
Hmm.
they're out. And there's so much more nuance to the issue. And I think that's a really strong communication opportunity for people to
Hmm.
create awareness around the nuances, because it's not just one kind of immigrant that's coming in. Tell their stories. If you're a political candidate going for elected office, tell the stories of the immigrants that are here that are making the community better, safer,
Hmm.
more, you know, wealthier, you know, just more enjoyable to
Hmm.
live. Tell those stories,
Hmm.
combat the narrative. And then when it comes to trust, I think about, you know, Mayor Mandami. I think the trust
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
local government in New York is astronomically high.
Hmm.
Why? Because you see Mandami all over. You see him with kids, you see him at schools, you see him in hospitals, you see him doing the work within the community, not just
Hmm.
in an office, signing legislation that is corporate,
Hmm.
you know, supporters and donors want him to sign. And so he's doing real work that's meaningful to
Hmm.
everyday lives of New Yorkers. Like take that and recognize that that's a winning message.
And I think what politicians really need to understand is that when constituents are like yelling at them, listen to the anger. Don't get defensive. Listen to the anger. It's valid. These are people that have, their lives are at stake, and they have nothing to lose. And so the least you could do is just listen, acknowledge, and what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do
Yeah.
about that so that they don't have to live in fear and anger?
There are people who are, you know, undocumented who are also queer who are
Hmm.
facing multiple angles of discrimination.
Hmm.
Have you experienced any of that, or have you heard stories of the queer immigrant community?
I have. I will say that I think when you're a trans person, especially, it's a very dangerous time right now, especially with the way they're being profiled and how it's hard for them to get out of the country. So I think that there are folks who are clearly in danger in our community that we really need to spend more attention to. And also even with queer folks, I think that queer trans violence is very present still. There are folks that are undocumented. There are folks that also have these identities that also put them at risk too. And if they get deported back to their homeland, they may face even severe punishment or death. So I think that's something to also lift up, because homophobia and transphobia is not exclusive to just the Western world. It's also exclusive to a lot of other places.
I think that's a really interesting point, is the oppression that they may experience by being sent back to a country
Hmm.
that is even more dangerous for LGBTQ plus
Hmm.
folks. You know, there are people who are queer, who are immigrants, are undocumented, and they came here because we have stronger marriage equality rights. We have, areas in the US that are way more friendly and positive towards the LGBTQ plus community. And now they're getting sent back to countries that will,
Mhm,
end lives. They will hurt and
mhm,
harm and punish and
mhm,
criminalize who they
mhm.
are. I think those are really tragic stories that aren't getting told. And I am curious if there's any advocacy work that we can do to bring that more into awareness.
It's important to look at some of the grassroots groups that are going on in these communities. I know that there's some like really good content creators, like TikTok and Instagram creators are now like starting to share their stories and also to share the work that they're doing to advocate. In Chicago, we have some great BIPOC or women-owned bookstores in Chicago. We've got great cafes that have been great places for allyship and for solidarity work to happen. So, yeah, I think just putting your ears to the ground and just asking, how can I help? And this is what I can do. And we can't save the world, but we can at least try to make it a better place.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story I once heard of this little girl who was going on this beach and saw all of these starfish, like hundreds, thousands of starfish. She was taking them and throwing them back into the ocean. And somebody
Mhm,
came to her and said, "Hey, there's thousands, tens of thousands of starfish. Why are you doing that? It's not going to make a difference." And she picks up another starfish, she throws it into the ocean. She says, "Well, it made a difference for that one." And then she
mhm,
picked up another one and said, "It's going to make a difference for this one." And so it does make a difference. Even though we can't
mhm,
solve the big problems individually, together, collectively, we can make movement and we
mhm,
can make the world a better place. We've seen it time and time again when people come
mhm,
together, when they advocate for themselves, when we pour money into programs that actually support people's well-being and flourishing and increase their quality of lives, people do better in society. They are better contributors to society. And so I think that's such a great point. Randy, Kim, I'm going to give you final word of encouragement to
mhm.
those listening. What would you say to someone, the big idea or the big thing you want people to take away?
Lean into your abundance. Forget the imposter syndrome. Just know that you belong. Your stories matter. And when you lean into your abundance, you think of the possibilities. And, what I do with my work, I don't like to fall into despair. Like, yes, the world is very rough right now. Yes, I feel the responsibility of trying to document it, but I also want to share the people that are doing the work. And I feel like they deserve that support. They deserve that love because what they're doing is keeping all of us alive. And I hope that whatever small thing that you do, whether it's talking to your family at the dinner table or just, um, spending time at a local nonprofit or, just taking care of a neighbor's kid. I mean, you're creating the building blocks, you're creating the muscles to develop the abundance that we are all seeking and tapping into.
I love it. Thank you so much, Randy, for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
As you know, I'm on a mission to expand what it means to be LGBTQ plus in leadership positions. One way you can help is by subscribing to this channel. By subscribing, you make our content more visible and get it in front of the right people. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Proud to lead.
Proud to Lead is produced by Next Step Social and Podcasting. Thank you to everyone who made this episode possible. For more information, visit nextstepsocial.com/proudtolead.